현대인의 입맛에 맞춘 그러한 레시피로서 여러분과 함께 오늘 이 레시피대로 공유하고 함께 하겠습니다.
I will be sharing with you today here at the CIA Kopia Korea's Korean cuisine and temple food, temple cuisine, passed down through the generations through traditional methods, yet brought up to the modern days with modern sensibilities. I've chosen recipes how that can be replicated in the homes to universities, and we'll be presenting and demonstrating for you here today.
먼저 음식을 하기 전에 오관계라고 있습니다. 오관계와 사찰 음식의 특징으로서 먼저 조금 짧게 하시고 음식으로 들어가겠습니다. 오관계, 이 음식이 어디서 왔는가?
오관계 pre-meal chant before she presents and demonstrates. Where has this food come from?
내 덕행으로 받기가 부끄럽네.
I am not worthy to receive it on my virtue.
마음의 온갖 욕심 버리고
Letting go of all greed from my mind.
건강을 유지하는 약으로 알며
Recognizing it as medicine for my body and health.
진리를 실천하고자 이 음식을 받습니다.
I receive this food to practice the truth in pursuit of enlightenment.
잠깐 한국의 한식과 사찰 음식의 특징이 있습니다. 한국 사찰 음식은 집착에서 벗어나 모든 생명들이 서로 의지해서 존재하고 있음을 깨닫고 조화롭게 공존하는 세상을 만드는 수행 정신이 담겨 있습니다.
I will first share a bit of the characteristics that make up Korean temple cuisine. Korean temple food, far beyond one of obsessions, contains the spirit of meditation, encompassing the realization that all living beings depend on each other to create a world where all can coexist harmoniously.
모든 생명에 대한 감사와 온 세상의 평화를 기원하는 사찰 음식과 한식은 다음과 같은 특징이 있어요.
Temple food, with gratitude for all life and prayers for peace in the world, has the following primary characteristics.
첫째는 육식을 철저히 금하고 있습니다.
First, meat consumption is strictly prohibited.
두 번째는 오신철에서 몸의 뜨거운 열을 제거하는 그런 양념을 쓰지 않습니다.
Second, oshinche, otherwise known as 5 pungent spices that which raise the body temperature and heat within, are not utilized in temple food.
한국의 한식과 사찰 음식에는 자연에서 나는 식재료를 사용하기 때문에 양리 작용이 있습니다.
Korea's cuisine and Korea's temple cuisine relies and utilizes only natural ingredients and therefore is often known to have medicinal and health benefits.
조미료는 천연 재료를 사용합니다.
All seasonings are natural or made and are not utilizing any artificial seasonings and condiments.
한식과 사찰 음식은 제철 식재료를 채식 음식이 발달되어 있습니다.
Korean cuisine and Korean temple food has really developed over centuries, utilizing seasonal ingredients combined with plant.
다양한 장류와 장아찌, 절임, 부강류와 김치에 발효 음식을 더한 콩으로 만든 두부장이 있습니다.
The vegetarian culture and the seasonal cuisine that have been developed utilizes as well a variety of fermented and preserved foods, including 간장, 된장, 장아찌, 견과류, and kimchi have all been developed over the centuries.
그러면 저에게 주어진 시간이 짧기 때문에 음식을 하면서 지금 소개를 해드리겠습니다.
Due to the time constraints of the limited time in this session, I will proceed with the demonstration and explain as I cook for you.
지금 레시피가 공유됐는데 레시피대로 하지 않습니다.
You've all received recipes for these dishes, but I do not use recipes.
여기 있는 식재료는 거의 양념류와 거기에 들어가는 호박 같은 이런 거는 전부 한국에서 제가 가지고 왔습니다. 그리고 야채 종류는 여기 CIA 가든에서 어저께 전부 채취를 해서 그대로 자연을 옮겨왔습니다. 그래서 여기 보면 뿌리 자체를 그대로 해서 사용을 하고 있습니다. 아디초 좋아합니다.
The ingredients you see before you, all of the condiments and sauces, as well as dried produce, have been brought from Korea's Cheonjeonam Hermitage. The fresh produce were harvested right here yesterday afternoon at the gardens at CIA Kopia, and they were brought in directly to utilize the combination of what has been preserved as well as what has just been harvested. And as you can see the roots of the carrots and the vegetables here, the root vegetables, they are just as if I have selected them, picked them right from the earth itself. And do you see this beautiful artichoke? I like artichoke.
이게 무엇입니까?
What is this?
두부?
Tubu.
두부입니다.
It's called tubu.
오늘을 이 두부는 원래 한국이 원조입니다. 그래서 고구려 시대 때부터 지금 내려오는 콩으로 만든 제2의 음식이라고 할 수 있습니다. 만들어진 음식을 제3차원으로 해서 다시 식물성 치즈를 만들어 보겠습니다.
This dubu, its origin traces right back to Korea. It began in Korea during the Goguryeo dynasty, and over the centuries have evolved to a dish and food that is enjoyed and made with soy. I'm going to use this dubu to create a cheese-like dubujang.
두부에 흐르는 간수물을 빼주고 여기에다가 소금으로 밑간으로 해서 뿌려줍니다.
So I'm squeezing out the moisture, the liquid from the dubu itself, and lightly doing the first seasoning with sea salt.
모두부를 배주머니에 넣어서 으깨줍니다. 처음 두부가 오기 이전에 두부의 모습을 찾아갑니다. 이미 콩으로서 불려서 두부를 만들었지만 두부를 국물을 물에 끓여서 거기서 떠오르면 거기다 간수를 넣습니다. 그 이전에 부드러운 순두부를 지금 모습을 찾아가는 겁니다.
So I've put the dubu, it's an extra firm dubu, in this hemp gauze cloth bag, and I am squeezing all of the liquid out. But in so doing, this is tracing back to the original form of what this once was before it became a block of dubu. It started its journey as soy, which was then soaked and boiled and added, to which became dubu eventually, but it is to return and find the very shape and essence of what this dubu was before you purchase it at a store.
두부는 믹스를 사용하면 여기에 있는 단백질과 이런 것이 파괴가 됩니다. 그래서 꼭 손으로 자기의 에너지 기운을 넣어서 두부를 으깨줘야 합니다.
While it might seem more convenient to use all of the appliances that are so readily available, when you do so by using blenders and such, you are then ridding of its proteins and all of the goodness that are intrinsically in the essence of the tubu soy. And so you must use your hand.
시간 관계상 이렇게 만들어 놓은 두부입니다.
So once you have, it takes time with hand to not only squeeze and to return it to its original shape. This was prepared earlier.
두부 양의 5분의 1 정도만 소금을 넣어줍니다. 소금은 꼭 천일염을 사용해 주세요.
So for the amount of tubu you are using, approximately 1/5 equivalent, 1:5 ratio using salt. But in this case, it's really important that you use sea salt. 천일염 is very specific to sea salt that comes from the tidal flats of Korea. And it represents a very tiny percentage, but must use.
콩으로 만든 된장입니다. 콩을 삶아서 발효를 시켜서 만든 겁니다. 소금물을 녹여서 놓으면 그게 나오는 물이 간장이고 그 콩 덩어리가 된장이 되는 겁니다. 그래서 여기에 간장을 조금 넣어서 발효를 도와줍니다.
This is 간장, which will be assisting in helping the fermentation process. Using 된장, 된장 is of course made starting with soy that has been first boiled and made into meju cakes, and then it is soaked into earthenware with brine water, and after a period of time of wind and sun and so on, you separate it out. One becomes 된장, one becomes 간장, and the 간장 that came from the fermented 된장 is what she is using to help.
소금은 상하는 거를 썩는 거를 막아주고 거기에 보관을 오래 할 수 있는 역할을 해주고 간장이 발효를 도와줍니다. 단백질과 모든 것을 함께 함축을 해서 만들어주는 역할을 하고 있습니다.
Salt is good for protects anti mold and spoilage, whereas 간장 helps with the fermentation of the tubu.
시간 관계상 많이 주무르지는 못하고 하는 것을 어떻게 하는지를 보여주고 있습니다. 그래서 이거를 만들어서 간을 딱 맞으면 좀 치즈처럼 짭짤해야 합니다.
So while it would normally take a much longer process and time, for the purpose of demonstration, I am going to show you what the finished product looks like. When it is seasoned properly, it should have that salty taste that would be similar to a bite of cheese, into cheese.
이 옹기도 숨을 쉬는 옹기입니다.
This ongi, Korean earthenware, also is breathable, which allows for the wind and the air to create the synergy and allow the 간장 and the 된장 to help the synergistic change of the protein in the tubu to become the cheese-like end product.
공기가 들어가지 않게끔 꼭꼭 눌러서 담아준 다음에 여기에다가 된장을 올려놓습니다. 된장은 후 오르는 공기적인 차단을 막아주면서 발효를 해주는 데 도움을 줍니다. 그래서 간장은 제가 지금 5년 됐습니다. 거기서 나온 간장이고 된장입니다.
It's important to press down firmly onto the tubu when you put it into the ongi hangari in order to make sure that there are no air bubbles. I then put the 5-year-old 된장 in order to then add another layer of protection for spoilage, but also to help the 두부장 to ferment. And the 된장 is 5 years old, and when separated, the 간장 that I just used is also 5 years, aged 5 years.
이렇게 만들어서 실온에서 한 달 정도 그늘에서 놔둡니다. 후 선발효시켜서 그 다음에 5개월, 6개월 동안 15도에서 20도 사이에 놔두면 자연 발효를 하는 겁니다.
The first month, let it ferment in an indoors, and afterwards for about 5 to 6 months, refrigerate, and it will continue to ferment, where you can then use it for different sauces as well as to enjoy as 두부장 itself.
여기 지금 두부장은 11월 달에 만들었습니다. 2021년 11월 달에 만들어서 여기 오면서 개봉을 했습니다. 그래서 거기 발효된 게 지금 이 두부장입니다.
This is actually 두부장 that I made back in November of last year, and for the purpose of this session, packed to bring here, and this is what it looks like after it has fermented during that time.
이 노란 것은 강황을 넣었습니다.
The reason for the color that you see is I added turmeric.
그래서 이 두부장이 거의 3개월 내지 5개월 보관만 온도만 맞춰주면 3년까지 갑니다. 그래서 꺼내서 이렇게 지대 보면 치즈처럼 크리미가 아주 풍부합니다. 그래서 이 활용 방법은 어디든지 비빔밥에 넣을 수도 있고 또 빵 토스트에다가 또 해도 되고 샐러드도 할 수 있습니다. 이따가는 샐러드 소스를 바로 이용을 하겠습니다.
So this 두부장, when stored properly at about 15 to 20 degrees Celsius for 5 to 6 months, it can then be stored and utilized for well up to 3+ years, and you can enjoy it as is or use it in a multiple applications for both in sauces, dipping sauce, or as a salad dressing, as I will show you now.
두부장을 만들고 소스는 다음에 하겠습니다. 이거는 지금 보면 호박입니다. 호박을 이렇게 슬러시해서
I will make the 두부장 salad dressing in a bit, but this is zucchini which I'm slicing.
이렇게 썰어서 자연으로 일주일 동안 말렸습니다.
I sliced it and let it dry out in the air for 1 week.
채소도 발효 미식입니다. 제철에 나는 식재료를 그 식재료가 그 모양이 좋고 그 영양이 충분할 때 말립니다. 말릴 때 자연에서 햇빛을 하면 그 햇빛에 의해서 공기층에 의해서 제3으로 이 물질이 변화합니다. 그럴 때 자연과 식재료가 갖고 있는 에너지가 같이 마찰을 해서 발효를 일으킵니다. 그래서 생야채보다도 이거는 애호박 고지라고 합니다. 이거를 지금 기름을 넣고 볶을 겁니다.
Vegetables are also fermented foods. When you pluck fresh produce at its peak, full of its nutrients and goodness, and are able to preserve it using natural air and wind, it becomes far more nutrient dense and can create flavors that are not recognized when it is served fresh.
들기름. 그래서 말린 것을 하루 동안 물에다가 불리면 이렇게 처음에 이 모양 말렸을 때의 부드러운 마음을 계속 유지를 하고 있습니다.
Again, as with the dubu, when you take a dried sliced squash and soak it in water for a full day, it returns again back to its original shape of once of its soft and tender, fresh squash that it was, but with all of the nutrients intensified, condensed in its dry form.
들기름,
Perilla oil
올리브유입니다.
and olive oil.
불 좀, 노할, 수도, 노할. 불 좀 조금, 네. 나물을 삶았다가 말려서 다시 할 때는 그 말랐던 생거일 때의 모습을 찾아가기 때문에 볶는 게 아니고 덮어준다 합니다. 그럴 때 기름 넣고 한번 식재료에 기름이 충분히 들어가면 물을 붓고 그 물이 졸아질 때까지 원래 모습을 찾아가는 겁니다.
When you preserve by drying the vegetables, you do not fry it, you stir fry it with plenty of oil, allowing for the oils to be absorbed into the vegetables itself to create the flavor profiles.
조금만 더. 한국은 사계절이 뚜렷하기 때문에 자연을 의지한 야채와 뿌리 채소와 이런 것을 많이 활용을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 제철에 날 때 보관하고 해서 제철에 나지 않을 때의 영양을 충분히 함께 하는 겁니다. 그래서 여기 지금 기름이 안에까지 먹어졌을 때 여기서 이제 물을 부어줍니다.
When the oils have been absorbed,
좀 더.
enough, you add water. The preserved vegetables, preserved and dried at its peak, is then brought out and enjoyed during the seasons of the year when those produce are not available
Small.
In a fresh form.
이렇게 주면. 젓가락이 하나 더 있네. 젓가락. 지금 보면 아까 좀 전에 불었을 때는 덜 불었기 때문에 그게 없습니다. 지금은 불어서 부피가 커졌습니다. 그래서 처음에 이 모양을 그대로 찾아갈 수 있는 이런 모양을 음식을 만드는 겁니다. 그래서 지속 가능한 음식이며 원래의 모습을 찾아가는 겁니다. 그래서 음식을 만드는 방법이 그냥 하는 것보다 굉장히 과학적이고 또 음식 만드는 방법에 의해서 자기 자신을 찾아가는 것과 마찬가지로 해서 음식 만들고 조리하는 방법도 제가 수행자이기 때문에 수행하는 것과 같이 간다고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
Taking the preserved and dried vegetable, really it's a journey of returning it back to its original essence. And so you are soaking it, you're allowing the oils to absorb, and as you saute it, and in time you see that what was once a very thin and small dried squash becomes back to its original shape. As a Buddhist nun, in my own journey as a practitioner of Buddhism, cooking food such as this is really another form of my own practice and finding a journey back to my own essence.
불 좀 줄여주세요. 미리 간장과 소금을 넣으면 여기에서 불어나지 않기 때문에 완전히 충분한 원래의 모습을 찾아가서 그때에 다 불어진 때 소금과 간장을 넣어서 간을 해줍니다. 그래서 여기에
If you were to season with 간장 and 소금, salt, too early on, before the vegetables have fully returned to its original essence,
소금.
because of the impact of 간장 and
Salt,
소금,
salt.
it will not fully return to its original essence and shape and size. So when it has returned to that first shape, that's when seasoning is added.
한국의 한식과 사찰님의 고명은 참기름과 깨소금과 고추입니다. 그래서 깨소금으로 가니쉬를 지금 하고 있습니다.
Traditional iconic garnishes of Korean cuisine as well as Korean temple cuisine is sesame seeds, sesame oil, chili peppers, and today I am using roasted sesame seeds.
아주 간장의 짭짤한 맛과 참기름의 고소한 맛과 깨소금의 맛이 아주 코끝을 스쳐서 먹고 싶은 마음입니다.
The combination of saltiness of the 간장 and the nuttiness of the sesame seeds, as well as the perilla oil, that fusion and combination just makes me want to taste.
그 흰 거 들어주세요. 아니 흰 거 들어 까만 거. 고추 농사지어서 말린 고추입니다.
This is a chili pepper I grew and harvested from my field in Cheongjin.
오케이.
Roasted perilla seeds, roasted sesame seeds,
이렇게 해서 짧게나마 두 가지를 만들었습니다. 마지막에 두부 소스를 이용해서 두부 구이를 같이 함께 한 샐러드를 만들어 보겠습니다.
So with that, that's a completion of two dishes, dubujang and the eobak. Now I'm going to use the dubujang into a salad dressing, bringing together the vegetables that were harvested here and pan-fried dubu slices.
아까 두부장 만드는 거 좀 주세요. 발효된 5개월 된 두부장입니다.
It's the 5-month fermented aged dubujang, combining with what was just made.
6년 발효된 오미자 청입니다. 자연 발효라 지금 가져올 때는 비행기에서 이렇게 발효가 되기 때문에 이거를 조금 졸여서 끓여서 왔습니다.
This is a 6-year aged omijachang made with 5 flavors berries from the back of the temple. And for the air flight, needed to do a bit of a reduction of it in order so that it would make the trip without exploding.
복분자청입니다.
This is wild raspberry syrup or chang, also known as extract. 천진함에서 감을 따서 감 식초를 담았습니다. 6년 됐습니다. 완전히 그냥 자연 발효입니다. This is persimmon vinegar, 6 years aged. Persimmons plucked right around the grounds at Chanjinam and doing nothing but letting nature do its work and letting it ferment.
설탕은 쓰지 않습니다. 대개 양념은 자연에서 이용한 양념으로서 참기름, 들기름, 참깨, 들깨, 거기에 이제 된장, 간장, 소금이 주입니다. 그리고 단맛은 과일이나 채소나 그 과일 열매를 따서 제철에 나오는 것을 설탕을 1대1로 해서 3년 이상 발효를 시켜야 그 설탕이 가지고 있는 에너지를 모두 빼는 겁니다. 그래서 거기에 청에 과일의 그 에너지만 남는 것을 계속 발효를 시킵니다. 그래서 그걸로 소스를 쓰고 있어요.
I do not use sugar as a sweetener. The primary ingredients used in Korean temple cuisine are dealing with perilla seeds, perilla oil, sesame oil, doenjang, ganjang that are homemade, and salt. That's the primary main ingredients. For anything that needs sweetness to it, utilize all variety of fruits and vegetables at its very peak period, plucked and made into a syrup 1-to-1 ratio with sugar. However, you need to ferment it for at least 3 years in order for the very chemistry of sugar to dissipate and the very energy of the origins and the essence and the fruits and the vegetables to come forward.
들깨입니다.
This is perilla seeds, roasted perilla seeds.
대개 식초가 들어가면 기름은 넣지 않습니다.
In most cases, when you add vinegar, I do not add oil.
여기에 팜에서 나온 비트 채 썰었습니다.
Julienne beets, fresh plucked from the farm here, the garden.
두부를 구웠습니다. 소금 조금 넣고 구워서 이를 샐러드에다가 함께 할 겁니다.
Lightly salted, firm tubu that was pan-fried earlier.
어슷썰어서 두부가 갖고 있는 처음에 부드러운 맛을 내고 있습니다.
Sliced on a bias, bringing forth the original taste of the tubu.
코리안 허브 방아입니다.
Banga is also known as Korean mint.
예쁘죠? 꼭 저 닮았습니다.
It's pretty, just like me, right?
여기서 파면서 너무 감격했습니다. 너무 예뻐서 이런 걸 먹을 수 있다니 정말 인간은 복 받았습니다.
I was so moved to be able to see and pluck and taste something so delicious and beautiful such as this. It's another realization how blessed we really are as human.
루꼴라.
Arugula.
저도 심었습니다. 모종해 놓고 왔어요. 꽃이 피면 환상적입니다.
Arugula. I also grow these, and when it blooms as flowers, it's amazing. It's
딸기 따왔습니다.
I plucked these strawberries.
채식을 하더라도 꼭 에너지가 있는 간장과 된장으로서 그 간을 넣어줘야만이 밸런스를 맞춰줍니다. 그런 생야채만 먹으면 전부 냉병이 걸립니다. 거기에 단백질, 식물성 단백질과 간장과 소금과 같이 에너지 기운을 줄 수 있는 것을 함께 콜라보를 해야 합니다.
When you are using fresh produce to enjoy, it's important that you allow to bring in proteins as well as seasonings such as kanjang and doenjang and others to create a synergy. When you eat just raw produce by itself without creating that synergy and a balance, it can create internal diseases.
이거는 연근 장아찌입니다. 5이야. 5이야. 5년.
5 years, she pickled the lotus roots.
그래서 금방 밭에서 나오는 거는 생명체가 바로 있기 때문에 그 생명에 대한 식재료에 애착이 있습니다. 거기에 이제 독이라든가 아니면 생명체를 유지하기 위한 자기 에너지가 강한데 그걸 바로 먹어주면 나의 에너지가 강해져서 탐욕, 욕심스러운 마음이 일어나고 남을 시기하는 마음이 일어납니다. 그래서 꼭 이러한 에너지가 들어간 이러한 장아찌류를 같이 해야 거기 기운이 같이 맞춰져서 그 기운을 보존을 해줍니다.
Like all beings, plants themselves also try and work to survive. And so when you pluck and eat raw produce on its own, you're dealing with the very essence and the energy of the plant being wanting to live. And the way it tries to survive is producing toxins that if we were to consume too much
No.
of would actually
그렇지.
be damaging to our health.
이거는 풀무원 두부면입니다. 두부가 있고 두부면이 있는데 오늘 두부면을 이용을 해서 샐러드에 같이 함께 할 겁니다. 제가 오기 전에 풀무원 이 두부를 사서 실질적인 샐러드를 해봤는데 이 야채에 필요한 단백질과 같이 콜라보를 했을 때에 소화가 굉장히 잘 되는 것을 느꼈습니다.
This is dubu noodles from Primwon, and utilizing both dubu and dubu noodles from Primwon. Before arriving here, we stopped by the Korean market and bought some both of the
유리볼
ingredients
하나 더 줘.
and
유리볼.
combined it in a salad. And the synergistic energy that was created
작은
from the protein of the dubu as well as the raw vegetables resulted in not only a delicious salad, but one that comforted and soothed my digestion.
만들어놓은 소스에다가 두부면을 묻힙니다.
I'm mixing in the dubujang sauce dressing into the dubu noodles.
이렇게 해서 세 가지를 했습니다. 첫 번째는 두부를 이용한 두부 치즈, 식물성 치즈를 만들어 봤고, 두 번째는 애호박을 말려서 하는 애호박 꼬지 나무를 볶아봤습니다. 세 번째는 두부와 두부면을 이용한 샐러드를 만들었습니다. 이렇게 해서 오늘 섹션을 마치겠습니다.
감사합니다. That was a very beautiful presentation.
시간이 넘었어.
Joanne Lee Molinaro is a blogger and author of The Korean Vegan. Known to millions as The Korean Vegan, Joanne began her blog in the same name in 2016 after adopting a plant-based diet. What began as a personal motivational tool to veganize her favorite Korean recipes in an attempt to maintain a connection to her family and culture quickly grew into something much bigger. She created Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram accounts that, in less than a year, she cultivated a modest following of approximately 10,000 and landed her first appearance on Food Network. In July 2020, Joanne created her TikTok account as a coping mechanism for the isolation caused by the global pandemic. After a single post of her making braised potatoes for dinner, and you should really check this recipe out, while her husband taught piano lesson in the background, it went viral, and Joanne shifted her attention to producing 60-second recipe videos while telling stories about her family, immigrants from what is now known as North Korea. To date, she has amassed more than 2 million followers and tens of millions of views. Please welcome Joanne Lee Molinaro.
Hi. Hi. Thank you, Chef Mai. I appreciate that lovely introduction. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you to our wonderful sponsors, Prumon, for this incredible tofu. Literally every one of the recipes I'm doing today features tofu, not surprisingly. Today, we are going to do 2 recipes in this session. Both are from my cookbook, and one of them is braised tofu, and the other one is tubucheon. And, you know, as Chung Kwan-soo demonstrated, tofu can be used for just about anything. It can be used for cheese, as we just discovered amazingly, totally mind-blowing, as well as salad dressings, as well as the main protein star of a dish. I'm going to be focusing for this session on 2 dishes that I think of more as traditional Korean dishes. In the second session, in the breakout, I'm going to be doing more like TikTok-y, trendy, fun, fusion type dishes. This is stuff that I would eat when I was growing up. And the first one we're going to do actually is tubucheon. I think of them almost like tofu nuggets. They're fantastic for like dinner parties, finger food, something that you would maybe share like at, you know, a corporate event, things like that. Very simple to prepare, and they're always like all gone. I did this for several dinner parties in the past couple months, and everybody uniformly says that one was my favorite dish out of all the things that were there. So we're going to start out with a block of tofu here. Actually, I'm going to wash my hands because my mom told me to wash my hands before I get started. But we're going to start out with a block of tofu. And, you know, tofu, as we've seen, can come in sort of different textures, different varieties. I think most Western palates are used to extra firm tofu. At least in the vegan world, everyone thinks that that's the only tofu that's ever worth eating. That's certainly not true. We can see tofu come in a variety of different textures. Here we are going to use the extra firm tofu, and we're going to press it. And as we saw Chung Kwan-soo do, she like squeezed very, very hard to get all that liquid out. And my biceps are not as developed as hers. And so what I like to do is I press my tofu in advance. I just stack a bunch of really good cookbooks on top of my tofu for about 20 minutes. And all that liquid is going to come out the bottom. And you're going to be stuck with actually a much firmer tofu than when you started. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to mash up the tofu. I like also using my hands for this process. I've tried using blenders. I feel like blenders actually blend it too much, and you get a very sort of not the kind of texture that I want. And you could also use sort of like a masher, a ricer, you know, those potato mashers. I've used those in the past. But to be honest, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, nothing works quite as well as your own 2 hands. And so that's what we're going to do here. So I'm just, you know, giving it a good mash here. It's very cathartic, especially if you've got a global pandemic to deal with. So it's fun to kind of do this, get your stress out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add it with a bunch of different things. Ooh, sorry. And you can really kind of figure out what you like to put in here. I'm putting in some, you know, very small, beautifully diced carrots in here. What else do we got here? We got some shiitake mushrooms. You can use portobello mushrooms. You can use button mushrooms. You can use whatever kind of mushrooms you like to use to flavor your tubucheon or your tofu nuggets. We're also going to add a little bit of spinach, just because we have that on hand. But if you want, you could also use chives. I love using garlic chives or using Korean chives. Thank you very much. Perilla leaves would be fantastic to add here. And then, of course, I am going to use a little bit of, let's see, some scallions. I'm going to throw that in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have to add a couple things to help bind this. Because if you try and turn these into nuggets right now, you're not going to have nuggets. You'll have a lovely crumble to add to your stir fry if you want. But it's not going to be these nuggets. So what we're going to do is we're going to add potato starch. I love potato starch. I feel like potato starch is a very underutilized ingredient in Western cooking. It makes things bind very well. I know that in a lot of egg replacements, you're going to see things like xanthan gum, agar gum, and potato starch. So I love using that to help bind. I'm also going to add a little bit of Just Egg here. And there we go. And what we're going to do is we're just going to use our hands. Oh, and we should probably add some salt to this at some point as well. Oh, there we go. My hands are a little bit dirty now to add salt. So we're going to add some salt. Thank you very much. And a little bit of pepper. And what you'll see is it starts binding together. Now, depending on the kind of tofu that you're using, the amount of moisture that you were able to get out of it through your pressing, you know how things are. Tofu can sometimes be different based upon where you are, how much time you spent with it, and what you're doing with it. So if you find that your tofu is not binding, it's like really, really crumbly, or it's not sticking together, add a little bit more potato starch, add a little bit more of your Just Egg. Just Egg is my favorite egg replacer. I love Just Egg, but as you can see, it comes together really easily. And you've got yourself a nice little tofu patty, okay? Do we have a little bit more Just Egg? No? It's okay if we don't. But what I like to do here at this point is I like to dip this in a little bit more egg replacer. If we had some egg replacer, we would dip this in a little bit more egg replacer, and then we put it onto the stove. But you don't need it. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about this recipe. If you don't have an egg replacer, which a lot of times people don't, egg replacers are different. I mean, Rebecca, extraordinaire here, she and I were talking about, not all are created equal. Just Egg happens to be an absolutely fantastic one. But if you can't get your hands on it or you don't have a liquid one, you don't need it for this. As you can see, one of the things that I've kind of suggested for the cookbook is if you don't have an egg replacer, go ahead and add a little bit of soy milk. That'll do the trick too in terms of helping the potato starch work with that liquid to create that glue that you need in order to create that lovely nugget shape. And Rebecca, again, did a wonderful job and created a beautiful nuggets in advance for us. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to turn our nonstick stovetop on here. There we go, sorry. We're going to turn our nonstick stove top, and we'll just add a little bit of oil, something like, extra virgin olive oil is fine, a little bit of canola oil, your vegetable oil, whatever you like. And is this which one is this? Okay, that's what I figured. All right, we're just going to drop a little bit in here, maybe about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half. We're going to wait for that to get nice and hot. And here's the thing with this nugget shape, and I'm sure many of you are much more familiar with this than I am. They can be a little tricky to fry because you want to get the entire thing fried, right? Like you want each part of the nugget to actually have heat, right? So you do, what I have to do is, I do have to watch it. It's not one of those things where you can just, put it on the stove and walk away and come back and everything's perfect. I wish it could all be like that. The next one we're doing is exactly like that, actually. So this one, what you do is you're going to put this on, the heat here once we get our oil